Reading shapes your brain, but here's what happens when we stop. The number of people who read for fun appears to be steadily dropping. 50% of UK adults say they don't read regularly, up from 42% in 2015, and almost 1 in 4 young people aged 16 to 24 say they've never been readers, according to the research by the Reading Agency. But what are the implications? Will people's preference for video over text affect our brains or our evolution as a species? What kind of brain structure do good readers actually have? My new study published in Neuroimage has found out, the researcher says. I analyzed open source data from more than 1,000 participants to discover that readers of varying abilities had distinct traits in brain anatomy. The structure of 2 regions in the left hemisphere, which are crucial for language, were different in people who were good at reading. One was the anterior part of the temporal lobe. The left temporal pole helps associate and categorize different types of meaningful information. To assemble the meaning of a word such as leg, this brain region associates the visual, sensory, and motor information conveying how legs work, feel, and move. The other was Heschel's gyrus, a fold on the upper temporal lobe which hosts the auditory cortex. The cortex is the outermost layer of the brain. Better reading ability was linked to a larger anterior part of the temporal lobe in the left hemisphere compared to the right. It makes sense that having a larger brain area dedicated to meaning makes it easier to understand words and therefore to read. What might seem less intuitive is that the auditory cortex would be related to reading. Isn't reading mainly a visual skill? Not only. To pair letters with speech sounds, we first need to be aware of the sounds of the language. This phonological awareness is a well-established precursor to children's reading development. The thinner left Herschel's gyrus was previously been related to dyslexia, which involves severe reading difficulties. My research shows that this variation in cortical thickness does not draw a simple dividing line between people with or without dyslexia. Instead, it spans a larger population in which a thicker auditory cortex correlates with more adept reading. Why size matters? Is thicker always better? When it comes to cortical structure, no, not necessarily. We know the auditory cortex has more myelin in the left hemisphere of most people. Myelin is a fatty substance that acts as an insulator for nerve fibers. It increases neural communication speed and it can also insulate columns of the brain cells from each other. Neural columns are believed to function as small processing units. Their increased isolation and rapid communication in the left hemisphere can be thought to enable the fast categorical processing necessary for language. We need to know if a speaker uses the category D or T when saying dear or tear, rather than detecting the exact point where the vocal folds start vibrating. According to the balloon model of cortical growth, the larger amount of myelin squeezes out left hemispheric cortical areas, makes them flatter but more extended. So while the left auditory cortex may be thicker in good readers, it's still thinner but much more extended than the corresponding right cortex. This hypothesis was corroborated in the recent research. The left hemisphere had generally larger but thinner cortical areas with a higher degree of myelin. So is thinner better then? Again, the answer is no, not necessarily. Complex abilities that require integrating information tend to benefit from a thicker cortex. The anterior temporal lobe, with its complex way of integrating information, is indeed the thickest structure of all cortical areas. An underlying mechanism might be the existence of more overlapping, interacting neurons which process information more holistically. Phonology is a highly complex skill where different sounds and motor features are integrated into speech sounds. It appears to correlate with a thicker cortex in an area near the left Heschel's gyrus. While it's unclear to what extent the phonology is processed in Heschel's gyrus, the fact that phoneticians often have multiple left Heschel's gyrus suggests it's linked to speech sounds. Clearly, brain structure can tell us a lot about reading skills. Importantly, though, the brain is malleable. It changes when we learn a new skill or practice an already acquired one. For instance, young adults who study language intensively increase their cortical thickness in language areas. Similarly, reading is likely to shape the structure of the left Heschel's gyrus and temporal pole. So if you want to keep your Heschels thick and thriving, pick up a good book and start reading. Finally, it's worth considering what might happen to us as a species if skills like reading become less prioritized. Our capacity to interpret the world around us and understand the minds of others would surely diminish. In other words, the cozy moment with a book in your armchair is not just personal, it's a service to humanity. This is from the conversation by Michael Roll, Professor of Phonetics at Lund University, on Science Alert. Please leave your comments and thank you for your support. Finally, support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.